I decided on an impulse to learn how to draw. Now, have you ever studied drawing?
No, I was cringing reading that chapter because I have spent decades talking about art and I cannot draw.
Hey all, thanks for tuning into Chicago Humanities Tapes. We are the audio extension of the live Chicago Humanities Spring and Fall Festivals. I'm your host, Elisa Rosenthal, and thanks for joining me on this journey of trying to find the answers to humanity's biggest questions. Luckily, we've got experts in pretty much every field, and can bring you the best and brightest minds from our live programs direct to your podcast queue. Today, beloved New Yorker writer Adam Gopnik explores and celebrates his love of taking up new skills in midlife, including magic, drawing, boxing, and even ballroom dancing with his adult daughter. He discusses his recent book, Real Work on the Mystery of Mastery, with Gloria Groom, the chair of Painting and Sculpture of Europe, and David and Mary Winton Green Curator at the Art Institute of Chicago. With 3 decades of New Yorker contributions, ranging from fiction to memoir to critical essays to humor, Gopnik is a true champion of the humanities, delighting in writing about a variety of disciplines and also learning and, inevitably, mastering them. He shows that the humanities are more than a class you had to take in high school. They're a vital contribution to making life happy, healthy, and full. To check out some of Chicago Humanities' upcoming live events, where you too can experience this artistic and thoughtful variety, head to chicagohumanities.org. We have tickets that just went on sale for fall 2024, including acclaimed author Jesmyn Ward, chef Abra Behrens with Greta Johnson, poet Aja Monet, and artist and author Anna Marie Tendler, all live in Chicago. This is Adam Gopnik with Gloria Groom, recorded live at the stunning Sanctuary at Chicago's Epiphany Center for the Arts in May 2023.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon to all of you. Wow. Oh, my God.
Yeah.
So to speak. Oh, yeah. I mean, are we worthy?
I'm not quite sure how to describe this place we're in right now.
It's astonishing. I was explaining to Gloria before we started that I've been on an endless book tour. I am truly the Willy Loman of American letters. I go from one place to another with my little satchel of books. And the only place as grand as this that I have been is the Bob Dylan Museum in Tulsa, Oklahoma, Gloria's hometown.
That's great. Oh, well, thank you all for coming. This is amazing. I am so happy to be back with Adam. Last time we were on a screen during COVID, so it was really great to see him in person today. And I have to just say, I love this book. I love the feeling of it. I just love it. The only thing I would say is that I wish there were illustrations. You know,
you're a visual person, Gloria.
I kind of needed illustrations for all of these different masteries you took on. But just to get started, though, it's dedicated to Kirk Varnedoe, and I just wanted Adam to say something about this and how it relates to the book.
Oh, thank you, Gloria. I'm glad that you asked that. So, Gloria and I should explain are celebrating our 4th decade of friendship. We met in 1985 at an Art Institute symposium on the Grand Jatte when I was a young pup art historian, and she was a young pup curator, and we pupped together in doing this. But the reason I was a young pup art historian and not yet a full-time writer, which is what I should have been, was because of Kirk Varnedoe. Kirk was, to my mind, one of the great art historians of his generation, and without question the greatest teacher I've ever known or experienced. He was my professor in graduate school. We went on to curate a show together at the Museum of Modern Art, which traveled to Chicago, called High and Low, Modern Art and Popular Culture, a show which was notorious in its day and nostalgic in its aftermath. This tends to happen to highly controversial things. People now remember it fondly who hated it when it opened. Kirk was the greatest teacher I've ever known. I wrote a long essay about him in an earlier book of mine called Through the Children's Gate, because in a way that recalls Hemingway's beautiful lines in, I still get verklempt about it, in Farewell to Arms, about how the world punishes those who are too gifted and beautiful. Kirk died very young of cancer. And But before he did, in the last year of his life, he gave a brilliant set of lectures on the history of abstract art at the National Gallery in Washington, and simultaneously, though he knew that he did not have long to live, he coached my son Luke's 8-year-old football team called the Giant Metrozoids to victory. And in the story, which is called Last of the Metrozoids, is about the intertwining of Kirk teaching the most abstruse and difficult of subjects, history of abstract art, while coaching these 8-year-old boys in how you play football correctly. So it was a study in teaching, and what was so impressive was that the two activities were completely continuous and entangled. Everything that he did as a most inspired lecturer I had ever heard, ever will hear in our history, and everything he did as a football coach were overlapped, basically meaning that, and this is thematic in this book, and it's why I dedicated it to Kirk, because he taught me this. It was always all about breaking it down into its smallest parts, whatever the task you had. If you were going to play football, the crucial thing you spent 2 hours doing was learning how to get in a three-point stance. You didn't run a play, you didn't do anything else, you just learned the right way of getting in a three-point stance. And if you were going to study abstract art, what you did is you did not worry about the vast abstract and metaphysical generalizations about God knows what, the loss of the picture plane or the acquisition of the picture plane and commodity culture. You talked about what exactly Mondrian had been doing step by step, day by day, week by week in his ascent, and then did the same with Frank Stella. And that habit of breaking everything down and then building it back up from the smallest parts into the larger practices that could be cultural, artistic, or recreational in football was what he believed in profoundly. And to such a degree, and I'm answering this question, I know, at greater length, but I can't resist this anecdote. We used to have a joke together, because I'm a crazy football fan too, and both of us have wives who are not football fans. And we missed the greatest college game of all time, Boston College, Miami, 1983, because we were off at a Shaker Fair with our spouses. And it was a standing joke between us about something you wanted to do but you couldn't do because your wife wanted to do something else. We would just say Boston College, Miami. And the last weekend of his life, we finally got to watch on tape Boston College versus Miami. And Kirk analyzed the famous winning pass that Doug Flutie threw with such acuity and brilliance, and broke it down into its fundamental features, and then it passed away.
Wow.
As you can see, it's a subject of deep emotion for me, so we should move on to
We'll move
something
on.
else. But just to say, what great teachers give us, right, are two things, and to generalize, and it's the truth, because this book is very much about my falling in love with a series of teachers, because I love great teachers, and great teachers are irascible people, male and female. They're just difficult people, but the thing that they all have in common, in my experience, and every one of the teachers who I studied drawing and boxing and dancing and driving with in the course of assembling this book, all have in common is they set an incredibly high standard and don't compromise on the standard. But if you're prepared to pursue that standard with passion and perseverance, they have infinite patience for you. They'll stick with you as you stumble in the belief that you can eventually dance. And that is what I think all great teachers have in common, and Kirk exemplified that.
Well, wow, thank you. One of the things I just loved about, there's so many, I mean, you said it wasn't a self-help book, but it really is, because there's so much you can take away from it, and it's just like constant, witty but profound things that I was kept underlining, which is, really not a good way to read a book, but I'm making all these little remarks. But I was thinking about, it's the most, to me, and I've sort of followed your career, it's the most personal. Even Paris to the Moon, which was very personal about your 5 years, and you had Olivia there. But when I thought about that, those challenges were imposed on you. I mean, you were there. Did you speak French before you went?
Yeah, kind of.
Okay. Well, somehow you managed to deal with the French. and the Parisian French. And but those were like imposed. Every day was a challenge. Everything you had to do just to survive was kind of like there. But this is a book about things that you chose to challenge yourself with. And I was trying to think of the difference between a George Plimpton who would do, he's going to do the football, he's going to do the timpani, he's going to do all that, these participatory journalistic things. But your book, it's more personal because everything you chose was for personal reasons. It's a connection to your family and your dearest friends.
Yes, this is true. It's funny you mentioned Plimpton, and you're the only person who has, because obviously that was in the back of my mind. Plimpton, by the way, I don't know if people still remember George Plimpton, but he was the editor of the Paris Review, and he wrote a wonderful book called Paper Lion about spending a summer in training camp with the Detroit Lions as a quarterback and so on. And Plimpton was a wonderful writer, and I reference him on page 5 of the book.
I know you do.
Just to wave at his ghost,
Yeah.
coming around. But you're absolutely right. It's a totally different kind of enterprise. First of all, I didn't have the idea of doing a book about learning to do things. I started learning to do things, and I realized it could become a book. So that the two crucial, the first two chapters, the chapter called The Real Work about magic, happened because my son, Luke, fell in love with card magic and got sort of precocious at it, had a fantastic, irascible teacher named Jamie Ian Swiss, and Jamie said to him, he was 13 at the time, "Hey kid, you gotta go out to Las Vegas if you're ever gonna really learn magic." And his school in New York said, "No, you don't have to go out to Las Vegas." And I said, "You know what? Let's go to Las Vegas. And if you have never followed your 13-year-old son to Las Vegas in order to dine with magicians, you haven't lived." And that happened, right? And I got fascinated by the craft of magicians, because magicians, for me, are a model art form, because unlike the painters and artists we work with and love, nobody takes them quite seriously, right? There's no one's going to write them up in the art world, in the New Yorker. There's no the magic world. So, and yet they have this incredibly high standard of craft. So I got fascinated by them. And then I had to learn, I decided on an impulse to learn how to draw. Now, have you ever studied drawing? Did you ever do?
No, I was cringing reading that chapter because I have spent decades talking about art and I cannot draw.
Right.
And it
Well,
was,
it's an endemic, what do the French call it? Déformation professionnelle, a professional deformation of art critics and art historians. And let me add right away, my little brother, who's an art critic of note and an art biographer, wrote a great biography of Andy Warhol, was very offended by the whole thing. Because his feeling is of course you don't have to draw well to talk well about art. And that's true in the same way you can be a great sports writer without being able to hit a fastball or throw a punch. But I still persist in thinking, and at least this was my experience, that you don't have to be able to hit a 100-mile-per-hour fastball to be a sports writer, but if you've never stood there when a 100-mile-per-hour fastball comes by, at some deep level you don't understand the level of skill and accomplishment that's necessary to play baseball. And I feel that having spent 2 years studying life drawing and never getting any, never advancing in any significant way, but getting a little bit better over those 2 years, studying with another irascible teacher, a wonderful representational painter named Jacob Collins, who thinks that all art, to our shame, Gloria, took a fundamentally wrong turn in 1855. And that
so pre-Bouguereau?
Pre-Bouguereau. Just, it's all, it's Ingres and his students were the last real painters. And everybody since has been going down. All the people we love, Seurat, Van Gogh, are just incompetent, ham-handed
color,
frauds.
in other words,
yes,
color is
anything.
out.
Only classical drawing counts. And he managed to create a world for himself in New York where when you walk into his atelier, you might as well be in Paris in 1854 because it's nothing but plaster casts and nude models and natural light, and that's what you learn. And I don't share his taste, but I respect the intensity of his conviction and of his commitment to a particular dream, which, parenthetically, is sort of avant-garde because nobody else is doing it. But what I learned, and this is the one thing I took away from it, is that art is made up of its minutiae. It's made up of that thousand, just, when I was talking about Kirk and breaking things down into steps, football begins with a three-point stance, and art begins with deciding that the weight of your figure falls on the left rather than on the right. And once you know how hard that is to register, you never look past it again. And you never again make the leap to the metaphysical generalization too quickly, which we're inclined to do, and nobody more guilty of that than me. We're inclined to treat art as though artists are a series of pawns in a game of historical chess that we are playing against each other. And that's truly a déformation professionnelle of art historians.
I was fascinated by that chapter and I almost wanted to bring a sketch pad so you could demonstrate how you were taught to. But the idea that you're not taught to draw what you see, like those projection things we used to get on the back of comics, where
yes.
you do that, and that instead you had to think about a nation or it was just such a strange technique.
Out on the road, when I had a crowd, and thank you, a little smaller than this one, I would begin by passing out drawing paper to everybody in the audience. I mean, when I say the audience, often it was 5 or 10 people. That's life on the road. And say to them, just draw the face of the person you're sitting next to. Because inevitably, everybody draws a kind of schematic version of the face of the person you're sitting next to. And what Jacob taught me was you got to break your symbol set, as he called it. In other words, the conventional stereotypes with which we see the world, so that we see, we make eyes in circles and noses as triangles and mouths as bananas and so on. And he'd say the way you break your symbol set isn't by observing, because that's what does that even mean? He said you have to form a new symbol set. He said, so look at someone's face and superimpose a watch face over it. And then just ask yourself, is his eyebrow, is the person you're drawing, is his eyebrow at 10 minutes past 1 or 12 minutes past 1? Or is the formation of his forehead at 3 minutes before midnight or 2 minutes before midnight? And I spent weeks just he had a beautiful term for this, tilts in time. And he would say to me, just like the three-point stance, he'd say, just make tilts in time. And I would make tilts in time. And your eye then becomes newly acclimatized to exactly the minutiae of observation. And you start making faces instead of making faces, and you start drawing faces instead of making faces. And it was a series of very counterintuitive little subroutines that Jacob had me learn exactly to break all the schematic information we all have in our heads, me particularly perhaps, about it. And it was fascinating. And the great thing, Gloria, is that even someone as utterly ungifted as I am gets better. You never get good, but you get better.
And that's another thing that struck me, is that there's a point when you were satisfied, that you said, I don't think you did 2 years, but you didn't go on. You did the boxing with Joey.
Yes.
But you didn't want to be with an opponent. You didn't want to. And talk about that a little bit.
Well, boxing, of all the things that I, and as I said, it wasn't a conceptual idea, or I'll learn all these things, just one thing after another, as happens to us in life, and particularly, I think, in, shall we call it midlife, there are things that you want to do. One of the things I wanted to do was it was also the pandemic impelled this a bit, because you couldn't go to a gym, right? Because the gyms were all closed in New York, believe it or not. And so I ended up taking boxing lessons with another amazing teacher, Joey Contrada. And if that's not a name from Central Casting, right? You say, what's the boxing teacher going to be called? Joey. Let's call him Joey Contrada. You say, it's a little too on the nose, right? But that's what my boxing teacher is named. And he's a great Muay Thai champion, what we ignorant ones call kickboxing. And Joey is a great teacher. And in the same way, right, what I learned from Joey is that boxing, you don't learn to box by unleashing your belligerence, right? You start, throwing punches. You learn a very tightly choreographed sequence of blows. Jab, jab, cross, slip, uppercut, right? This typical one. And you have to just continually repeat them until it begins to seep into your insides. So you're no longer remembering it, you're just doing it as a seemingly seamless sequence. And which is what you do. You persevere until that begins to happen. And the other thing, which is fascinating, is that the only way you can learn to box, as I'm sure anyone knows who's done it, is by imagining your opponent. There is no opponent, right? But you have to constantly be thinking that every punch you throw is in anticipation of the punch he might throw, right? Otherwise, there's no structure to the art of boxing. There's no meaning to it exactly because you're not responding to anything. Now, I have never actually gotten in the ring with anyone. If you can find another 5'5" Jewish intellectual in his mid-60s who has a lot of belligerence to unleash, preferably someone on the far right wing, so I would have motivation. I will step in the ring and we can fight a benefit. But until that moment arrives, it's all, I'm doing it in a gym. But it's the most intellectually invigorating thing I've ever done because it exemplifies that process of breaking things down into their smaller parts and then building them back up. Not building them back up. They become on their own. They become on their own a sequence because of the nature of our psychology, which is very good at implanting things until we get to do it. I mean, dancing is the ultimate and the obvious statement of that. You stumble, and then you step, and then you find your dancing. And the dancing, as you know, I did, again, not in order to learn to dance, though I wanted to, because my daughter Olivia, who, as you say correctly, was the big event. All of Paris to the Moon, that book is about moving towards Olivia, my baby being born, our baby, being born in Paris. And Olivia now is in her early 20s. She went off to university. And she, as I like to say, she came into herself rather than coming out to her parents. She discovered in university that she was queer, which is the word she prefers to gay, and delightfully so, with a fantastic girlfriend. And we were not at all troubled, much less shocked by it. But it marked a new moment in our relationship. We'd always been extremely close. We're very similar in temperament and tension, body tension. And I said to her when she was talking to me about it, instead of saying, darling, let's talk about, intimate details of our life and yours, I said, baby, would you like to learn to do ballroom dancing together? And to my surprise and delight, she said, yes, Dad, I would love that. And we both knew it was a way of having an intimate conversation that wasn't verbal. And we're both very verbal people, and this gave us a chance to have intimacy without discourse of that kind. And we started taking dance lessons exactly, again, at the height of the pandemic, so we couldn't go in a dance studio, and we would dance on the Esplanade in Central Park together. We had another wonderful teacher, Steve Dane, whose name we didn't know until afterwards, because when we first got introduced, we thought it was Steve Dance, which made a lot of sense. So we always called him Steve
Joey
Dance.
Contreras.
Exactly.
Central casting.
And we learned the foxtrot and the waltz, and we would go out there on Central Park, and Steve would play, old Sinatra records, "Fly Me to the Moon."
Of course.
And Olivia and I would dance, and it was the most intimate conversation we ever had. And what was fascinating too, Gloria, is it was very much, though nonverbal, it was about the material of her identity, because she would tease me. She'd say, Dad, this is the most gendered activity we've ever done. Because the man leads and the woman follows in ballroom dancing. And I said to her, I would whisper to her, you want to do it the other way around? Because Steve, a good classical teacher, would say, Adam, now you step forward with your left foot. And I'd say, babe, do you want to do it the other way around? And she'd say, no. And I knew what she was saying was, here in Central Park on the Esplanade, listening to Sinatra, we can make a little parenthesis in time where we're living in a previous thing. We don't need to subvert the foxtrot. The foxtrot is sufficiently subverted in the world. And it became a very intimate conversation the two of us had. And that's the other theme of the book, is exactly that. And everything we do involves everything we are, right? We can't do... It's why we love art, I think, Gloria. It's because you can't make a gesture on canvas, and a real artist can't, that doesn't evoke the entirety of the social world that she's in, or the entirety of the psychological state. I think sometimes of Elizabeth Murray, the wonderful American painter who has left us sadly too soon. But, it was always fascinating to talk to her because she would do these wonderful pictures of kind of big cartoon feet and shoes. And I asked her once about them, and I said, why do you love that icon? She said, oh, those are my father's feet. Those are my father's shoes. He was an insurance salesman, and he would come home at night, and there'd be a big hole in his foot because he'd be pounding the pavement. And nobody had ever made that association. We talked about her love of cartoon, her mastery of shape, but everything we do involves everything we are, and that's another lesson, I hope, of the book.
Wow. Well, I have so many questions. So, one question, because Adam was an amazing art critic, as you know, for The New Yorker. Amazing. Because you knew artists, you knew living artists, but you also knew art history. And to me, you mastered that. You nailed it. And yet, you moved on. Yeah. And why was that?
Oh, it's a great question. Partly for that very reason. I mean, I hardly think I'd mastered it.
You were like you were the John Russell.
Right.
You were the John Russell.
I did feel, I will give you a very straight answer to that, which I don't think I've ever said in public. I was going to see, shortly after my son Luke was born, 1994, and I was the art critic of the New Yorker, which was a wonderful job that I was blessedly lucky to have. And when we're young, we don't understand our blessings adequately of such things. And I was going to a Bruce Nauman show of his clown torture videos. And I'm a big Nauman fan. I'd written about Nauman. I could explicate it. I could explain it. I could articulate it. He's an immensely serious and significant artist and all that. But as I was going through it, I thought to myself, I love this stuff, but I don't love it exclusively. I'm fascinated by how kids grow up. I'm fascinated by childhood, by France, by a million other things, and I'm not writing adequately about the things that I love. And finally, when you don't write if you're a real writer, as I hope I am, if you're not writing about the things...
I think we can say yes.
No, I mean, if you're, the difference being that journalists write from the outside in and writers write from the inside out. And if you're not writing adequately from your true insides, if you're faking your insides, it will become apparent to your readers that it's an abstract, again, activity. And I said at that moment, I'm going to stop doing this. Not because I didn't love it, but because I loved other things equally, if not more, and I wanted to be writing about my actual inner life, not about my secondary inner life. So I walked back to the office, and I said to Tina Brown, who was then the editor, I think I'd like to go somewhere and write from abroad. And bless her, she said, well, London, of course. And I said, no, actually, I was thinking Paris. She said, Paris, all right. And that basically, and
wow.
we turned it around. And I miss it sometimes because, as you know better than I do, there are certain moments when you're with works of art that give you a charge so powerful that it is almost unbearable, right? That you can't... we were just talking before, I went to Saint-Remy, the asylum where Van Gogh was sent after his Christmas episode in 1888 and painted his greatest pictures just this past fall, and I was literally overwhelmed with emotion at being in that space and thinking about him, and I wanted to write something about it. And I will tell you that after how many years away, I signed a contract in 1990 to write a book on American art, a new history of American art, and I'm now going to do it. I'm now going to put it together,
good.
And with especially and with and with help from the Art Institute too, because the Art Institute very generously has put their whole collection is on what's the word I'm looking for? Open source right, which is fantastic.
Common.
Right,
Yeah,
so it's no longer.
whatever,
Anyway,
yeah.
that's a very long-winded answer to your question, but
that's fascinating.
that's the reason. So there are moments when I regret it only in as much as there's either a wonderful show that you want to praise or a terrible show that you want to assault. And the other thing I'd add is that I knew one great art critic intimately, Robert Hughes, right?
Yeah.
And I never felt that Bob was sufficiently fulfilled by being an art critic. He was a man of immense encyclopedic appetites, and he wrote about those later. He wrote good books about cities, but in a funny way, he had become professionalized as an art critic in a way that constrained the totality of his gift as a writer, and I never wanted to be in that position.
Interesting. And that brings me to something else, because as I was thinking about these different challenges, and how you write so beautifully about how life is, you go through school and our DNA is to avoid, we try to escape what we aren't good at, what we think we won't be good at, because we want to excel, because that's the way we're programmed. But I was also thinking about the idea of a recital, because I think that's what ruins things when you have to actually, a culmination, your learning was for yourself. You were satisfied at this level, you'd been with the masters, you knew what it took. And I wonder if that's something, how do you feel about that? Because it seems like unless you have that final performance, that recital, whatever, you didn't study it.
Yeah, well, in the book, I make a distinction between, and I should tell quickly just that when I thought when I gave up art criticism as a full-time thing, I thought Kirk Varnado, we were talking about, would be upset because his whole life was devoted to it, and I'd been very much his student in doing it. So
After rugby.
Yes, exactly. And I went to tell him, I said, hey, I've decided I'm going to stop writing art criticism and go to France. And he said, oh, thank God. And I thought, huh? But he meant it in the most generous way. He meant, I'm glad you've thrown your cap over the wall and you're following your heart. The truth is, I make a distinction in the book, right, between achievement and accomplishment, which I know can seem a little subtle to people, but that's what I'm talking about. There's some things in life, and we drive our kids in this society particularly towards achievement, which always involves the test, the recital, getting into the next school, flourishing in the next grade, all of those things that have tests at the end. And those are achievements, and we live in an achievement-oriented society, and we count the achievements by money sometimes, by grades other times, but we are driven by achievement. And there's something empty about it. I mean, we all have to live in a real world of professional achievement, and we can't deny it. And I am as driven to those things as anyone, and as guilty of that as anyone can be. But when my own kids were growing up, the thing that I couldn't help but notice is that what really gave them meaning in their lives were the accomplishments they pursued on their own, whether it was learning card tricks or guitar chords or sewing. That those accomplishments gave them a serene foundation of possibility that no number of scholastic or academic achievements ever could. And the more that we encourage our kids and ourselves to pursue those accomplishments, which are self-generated, have a very high standard of craft, but in your sense, no recital at the end necessarily. Not only the happier will they be, but the better suited, the better fitted they'll be to find something in the world of achievement that they really want to achieve and get out of the terrible rat maze that we put kids in so often, right? Where the question is, if you keep studying, you can get the little hit of sugar water and then turn to your right, and there's another hit of sugar water awaiting you, and where the center of the maze is, much less the exit, is never defined. So I think there's a huge value. And let me add, and this is something that you learn on by listening. I'm not doing much of it today, I'm aware, but on the road you do. And one of the things that I was struck by, and I hadn't fully internalized when I was writing the book, is that for so many people who are in middle age or early middle age or late middle age, we tend to patronize people who are older and pursuing new things, right? We say, oh, good for you, you're doing macrame or doing yoga or whatever it is. And that's what this book is about in large part. But the truth is, and this is the good news that I bring, the gospel I bring, is that those things, the older folks who are doing something new, they've got rocket fuel in their hands. That's not trivial or secondary. That's incredibly powerful, because the single thing that we as human beings seek is what I like to call the cognitive opiate of the flow. There are a lot of opiates we can put in our veins. There's only one opiate we produce in our brains, and that's that extraordinary feeling of being completely absorbed in something outside ourselves. When you're hanging a show, right? It's that feeling, right? Day after day, and you literally lose track of time because it's so absorbing. When I'm in the middle of an essay. But the great thing is that if you give yourself over to a new activity and you pursue it with passion and perseverance, even if you never get any good at it by an external standard, you still have access to that cognitive opiate. You still have access to the flow and to that absorption. I have never been happier in my life than I am when boxing badly. And that includes writing well. I write well and I box badly, and they both make me about equally happy. In fact, the boxing makes me happier because when we do something well, when we do something as a vocation, we can only be aware of the space between our original ambitions and our actual accomplishments. So that when I'm writing, I'm thinking every sentence is going to have the psychological intricacy of Proust and the sensual rhapsody of John Updike and the malicious wit of Jane Austen. And it doesn't. I never quite get all the sentences that good. And that's all I see. I never take pleasure in my own writing for that reason. I take pleasure in doing it, but not in reading it. But when you're boxing, you can say, boy, I really threw that jab today better than I've ever thrown it. Or I opened up my shoulder to throw the cross better than I ever have. It would not knock out a mouse if the mouse was there, but the potential, and my favorite chapter in the book actually is about that. Because, I pursued that old folk tale that hummingbirds and elephants have the same number of heartbeats in a lifetime. That, you've all heard that, right? And that turns out to be true. There's a research project at North Carolina State University called the Heartbeat Project, and they just collate the heartbeats of mammals and birds. And it turns out, grosso modo, that almost all mammals and birds have 1 billion heartbeats in a lifetime. The hummingbird expends her heartbeats in 100 days, the elephant in 100 years. But the metaphoric leap you have to make from that is that the hummingbird doesn't feel that she has less of existence in her experience than the elephant does. And we can judge ourselves by our interior hummingbird heartbeats as naturally as we are judged in the outer world by the exterior elephants of excellence. And so this is a long-winded way of saying that there is limitless rewards in pursuing new accomplishments in later life that you will always do badly.
Well, and I love the fact that always do badly. Well, that's optimistic. I love the fact that in this world of remote learning and you can learn by YouTube, that you went out and sought people that were really, really good masters of what they do, because you were interested in the learning, but also the relationships. And it sounds like you kept these relationships. Like, these are not just, I'm through. These are people you're going to see again.
No, we had a party, in fact. I didn't want to have a book party because book parties are inherently sad because everybody's, fingers crossed, hopeful the book is going to do well. So we decided to have a book party after the book was already a failure, when we could just enjoy it. But we brought together all of the teachers from the book, and because they had not known each other,
including your mother.
Well, unfortunately, I couldn't bring my mom along. She's not as well as I wish she was.
But she was there.
But she was there. Oh my God, my mother's there every minute of my life, hovering over my shoulder and telling me, "Dear, you can do that better."
That's where it started.
Yeah, no kidding. No kidding. You want to excuse us? We maybe need a psychoanalytic session here. But it's true that my mother is an extraordinary woman. She was a great cook and a great baker, and none of that was what she did professionally. She was a linguist, scientist, and there's a whole chapter about going up to learn to bake with her, which I never thought, Gloria, but now that I stopped to think about it, is very much like the chapter about dancing with my daughter. It was a way of having a conversation with my mother, who's a brilliant but somewhat difficult woman, and we are very much alike, and we're loving, but could have complicated exchanges. And I thought, well, I'll just go up and bake with her, and we'll just have our hands in the same sourdough starter. And that turned out to be very worthwhile. And also it was revelatory for me because Martha, my wife, I had totally forgotten, was a baker when we first met. She baked her own bread, but I got kind of so lost in my mother's very extravagant and ostentatious world of showy baking that her little loaf got, I had amnesia about it. She got outloaved. She got outloaved. And I had to be reminded that she was not a loaf, but a baker, which is a valuable thing for a husband of many years.
So I think we should probably wrap up and ask some questions of Mr. Gopnik.
Hi, Mark Siegel. So
Hey,
you
Mark.
talked about baking. I'm more of a cook than a baker, although I've started trying to master pizza making at home. But I'd be interested, I've heard you on a lot of food podcasts, and I'd be interested in what you see, if any, as essential differences between baking and cooking, particularly along the sort of the lens of mastery that you've worked on, other than you tend to focus on using a scale in baking more than in other cooking.
Yeah, it's a great question. In plain English, right, cooking is improvisational and baking can't be, right? And that's hard. So I love cooking, right, because you always can, you add a little something extra if you're a little bit off, if you have if the recipe calls for a quarter cup of white wine and you add half a cup, or you don't have a quarter cup of white wine and you use vermouth, you can play with it. You can't do that with baking. Baking is essentially a chemical transaction, and it suits people like the French, who are very rigid in their habits, right? And I'm a natural cook in that way. For me, cooking is the release, and I cook almost every night because I'm locked in my head in the precision of words. And then I come out at night and I can escape into a physical precision of chopping onions, but also into the freedom of doing things. So baking for me is kind of antithetical to my nature, but I still try it. And my mom taught me how to make the boisson, which is her own invention. It's a cross between a brioche and a croissant. And this will tell you something. In one of these colloquies, when I was blessed with an interlocutor like Gloria, it was Malcolm Gladwell. And Malcolm said to me, "How could you let $1 million just fall on the floor? You should be opening boissonteries all over America, where you have Mom Gopnik's boissons," right? This is the difference between my dear friend Malcolm Gladwell and myself.
I just want to interject here. We've done a lot of French shading, but both of us love the French, and we're both Légion d'honneur.
D'honneurs, yes.
Just so you know that we're both wearing proudly our little red
Yes, this is the only
rubands,
time where you will
yes.
see two people with the Légion on their lapels, or not the only time, but a time.
My name is Mark, and first of all, thank you very much for coming out and sharing your experiences. My question, ironically enough, concerns the French language and mastering the French language. My personal experience, I studied in high school and in college. However, it wasn't until I joined the Peace Corps and served as a volunteer in Chad, Africa. And the bottom line is, my question is, what was your experience with learning the French language? Mine was the breakthrough occurred when I lived in Chad and had to speak French in order to obviously communicate with others. I'd be curious as to whether or not you feel the immersion process to learn a language is critical, and thank you very much.
Yeah, I grew up in Montreal, Canada, which is a French-speaking city, obviously, and I learned hockey French. I learned all the vocabulary of ice hockey, which is the national religion of Quebec, and so that was not very helpful in France, having a very advanced vocabulary if you're talking about ice hockey. But you find, yes, exactly, immersion matters, and the two things that will produce excellence in language learning are eroticism and emergency, and the two can be linked. The way to learn another language is to fall in love with someone who only speaks that language, like, the Beatles' great song, Michelle, right? That's how you do it. And the way that my wife and I realized that we had finally, after 6 years in the country, we were not that bad in French was exactly when Olivia was being born, and she got turned around, as happens to babies, and we had to make the decision. It was Martha's decision, but obviously I was there, on whether or not to wait to see if the baby would flip again or to do an emergency cesarean. And after much back and forth, she decided that, well, let's do the emergency cesarean, fine, baby. Everything was great. And it was only a couple of days later that we looked at each other and said, we did that whole thing in French, right? Qu'est-ce que vous conseillez, madame? Est-ce que c'est une bonne idée de le faire ou pas? And we just did the whole thing in French without even stopping to think that we were speaking French. We just did it. And that's still the height of language. So
Hopefully a conversation you don't have to have again.
yes, that we never will have again. But it was the proof. So create an emergency or find an erotic relationship.
I'm Gina Bucola. I'm chair of Humanities at Roosevelt University here in
great.
Chicago. And I just thought, while we're here with Chicago Humanities, in this Church of the Humanities, if you could speak a little bit to the way in which, at least I feel, the humanities are sort of under siege right now, with backlash against higher education
Yep.
and book bans nationwide, et cetera.
I would love to, and it's a pleasure to meet you. I had once did a lecture at Roosevelt on Galileo and Shakespeare, and it was I worked hard on it, and it was something, I do even better lectures for Gloria, but it was a good lecture.
Thank you.
It was a good lecture, and I love doing it, and I love the environment. Yes, let me speak to this because I feel passionately about it. One of the points of the book, which I actually wrote about overtly in the first draft of the introduction, and then was persuaded by my editor to delete because it seemed too, too inside baseball in a way, was that one of the things that this book is about is the superiority of the humanities to the social sciences. Because you will find a lot of people, a lot of this book is about material that very much is the domain of the social sciences, right? How do we learn things? How do we know things? What goes on in our heads? What goes on in our lives? What's the social psychology of learning? All those things. And that's all valuable and useful and so on. But the point is that in real human lives, there are so many vectors pressing down on everything we do. And that's what I'm trying to say in this book. You can't extract out the cognitive psychology of learning from the social psychology of family relations. And you can't extract out the social psychology of family relations from the intimate psychology of sibling relationships. And there will never be a science of family. There will never be a science of siblings. There will never be a science of storytelling. There will never be a science of love. Not because these things are ineffable or mystical, but exactly because they are so deeply human, which means simply so susceptible to so many vectors at the same time, that the only way we can explain them and talk about them adequately is through the humanities, is through essays and stories and novels and songs. That's the material by which we come to understand the most difficult things we do in life. So this book is meant to be a vindication of the superiority of the humanities to explain the things that matter most to us in life over all anything you can study in a STEM program. Is that a place to end?
That's a beautiful place to end. Thank you so much.
That was Adam Gopnik with Gloria Groom, recorded live at Chicago's Epiphany Center for the Arts in May 2023. Check out the show notes for more information on Adam Gopnik and his recent book, Real Work on the Mystery of Mastery. Chicago Humanities Tapes is produced and hosted by me, Elisa Rosenthal, with help from the team at Chicago Humanities for the programming and production of the live events. Head to chicagohumanities.org for more information on how to catch your favorite speaker in person the next time they're in town. New episodes of Chicago Humanities Tapes drop first thing every other Tuesday, wherever you get your podcasts. If you like what you hear, give us a rating, share with your friends, and scroll through our incredible backlog of programs to discover a gem that might surprise you. We'll be back in 2 weeks with a brand new episode. But in the meantime, stay human.
You said you took up boxing because of Trump. If things don't go as well as they should, what will you take up?
Learning Italian.